Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we are going to discuss the important issues appearing in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 30th March 2019. The news to be discussed has been presented on the screen, and timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let's start our today's discussion. The first news appears on page number 5. It says, debris from anti-satellite test to disintegrate in 45 days, as per the officials. Also, US confirms that 270 pieces don't pose threat to International Space Station. So, after India tested its anti-satellite missile, questions were raised by the United States with respect to space debris being created in the low Earth orbit. Now, this topic becomes a part of general science in your prelims examination, as well as in your mains it gets covered under GS paper 3, specifically under science, technology, developments and their applications, as well as achievements of Indians in science and technology. So the testing of anti-satellite missile by the government of India is a very important and significant step. Hence, we must know every important aspect related to anti-satellite missile. Now we mentioned that the space debris created on the collision was created in the low Earth orbit. So in this regard, we must know about low Earth orbit. Now the topic of low Earth orbit was also discussed by Mangal sir in the DNS dated 28th March 2019. So it says that low Earth orbit is an Earth-centered orbit with an altitude of 2000 km or less. And most of the man-made objects in space are in the low Earth orbit. Hence, this low Earth orbit with respect to man-made missions to space becomes very critical. And it is in this respect that creation of the space debris becomes important because these may affect any satellites or even the International Space Station. Now on that day, Mangal sir discussed that Ministry of External Affairs had said that test was done in the lower atmosphere to ensure that there is no space debris. Whatever debris is generated will decay and fall back into the earth within weeks. And it is because of this that United States raised the concern with respect to space debris. So those of you who missed the DNS dated 28th March 2019, let's quickly revise what actually happened. The Indian anti-satellite missile hit an imaging satellite, that is microsat-R, in the low Earth orbit of 300 km. And because of this collision during testing, at least 270 pieces of debris were generated in the low Earth orbit. Now the experts suggest that most of these debris are expected to disintegrate within 45 days. However, US had raised certain concerns with respect to these debris being generated in the low Earth orbit. US raised this red flag because of China's earlier test of ASAT, that is anti-satellite missile, in the year 2007, which created around 3000 pieces of space debris. 616 of these 3000 pieces have been disintegrated, but the rest still remains in the orbit. So it is because of this the United States had raised certain concern with respect to these debris being created in the low Earth orbit. The government of India replied that since most of these debris has been created in the low Earth orbit, hence it would fall towards Earth and burn up as soon as they enter the atmosphere. Now, despite assurance given by the government of India, there is still concerns that these number of debris created in the low Earth orbit is likely to grow as the debris field spreads out in due time, as most of these debris are expected to disintegrate within 45 days. However, it has also been confirmed by NASA that these debris do not pose any immediate threat either to the International Space Station or to any other satellites orbiting in the low Earth orbit. Hence, this particular news was specifically with respect to the debris being created on the collision of anti-satellite missile launched by Government of India, which broke the imaging satellite, that is microsat-R. Now, these debris are being constantly monitored by Indian Space Research Organization as well as North American Aerospace Defense Command. Now, since we have mentioned about these space debris, hence it becomes important to know that whether these space debris impacts astronauts who go to the outer space. So on this note, NASA keeps a track of these debris created in the lower Earth orbit. So when an object among the space debris is expected to come close to the International Space Station, then in that aspect, NASA can slightly change the station's path to avoid the collision with the object or avoid the collision with the space debris. So this is how NASA keeps track of the space debris as well as protect the International Space Station from certain collision from these space debris. Further, it mentions that ISS, that is International Space Station, is the most heavily shielded spacecraft built, and the space station can survive impact with smaller pieces of debris. So these space stations have been designed in a way to survive impact or collision of these smaller pieces of debris. These astronauts are also saved from these space debris by the special space suits which they wear. It says that these space suits helps to protect the crew members from orbital debris and micrometeoroids when astronauts are outside the space station. So there is always a danger with respect to collision from these orbital debris as well as from micrometeoroids when these astronauts go out in the outer space station. It says that the space suits worn by these astronauts include a layer of strong, thin material that protects astronauts from these impacts from space debris. And this layer is made from materials used in bulletproof vests. Now it becomes important to protect the astronauts from these space debris as well as the micrometeoroids, because in space there is no layer of atmosphere which protects these astronauts from collision by these space debris, because when these space debris enter the Earth's atmosphere, they get burned up by the friction of Earth's atmosphere. Most of these space debris never reaches Earth's surface because they are vaporized by intense heat generated by the friction of passing through the atmosphere. However, there is no such blanket of atmosphere which exists in the outer space. So in the outer space, these specially designed spacesuits also protect these astronauts from orbital debris as well as micrometeoroids. Now we have mentioned about these micrometeoroids. So first of all, what is a meteoroid? It says a meteoroid is usually a fragment of an asteroid, and this can be either very large or it can be either very small. Whereas a micrometeoroid is a particle smaller than a grain of sand. So the astronauts have to protect themselves from these space debris or meteoroid as well as the micrometeoroid. Thus, this news with respect to space debris becomes important from our prelims perspective, as questions can be expected in the upcoming 2019 paper. With this, let's move on to the next news discussion. The next news appears as a lead article on page number 6. It says pathways to an income guarantee. There is a compelling case for spending rupees 3.6 lakh crore on the poor, but it must be done carefully. Now this article is with respect to the NYAY scheme, that is Nyuntam Aay Yojana, which has been recently announced by the Indian National Congress in their election campaign. The NYAY scheme has appeared during the election campaign, so it is very less likely that UPSC will ask any question based on NYAY scheme in your upcoming prelims examination. However, let's still understand the basics about NYAY scheme and how is it different from universal basic income. Now in your prelims examination, this topic forms a part of economic and social development, as well as in your mains it gets covered under GS paper 3, specifically under issues relating to Indian economy. Now the plan of NYAY scheme is to give rupees 6,000 every month to the bottom 20% of the population. And as per certain estimates, this bottom 20% of the population is roughly around 5 crore families or 25 crore individuals. And this proposal under the NYAY scheme is different from universal basic income, as universal basic income is basically a small amount of money paid every month to every citizen of the country without any terms and conditions. Whereas the plan under NYAY scheme is to pay to bottom 20% of the population and not to every citizen of the country. As per certain estimates, the NYAY scheme would cost around rupees 3.6 lakh crore per annum. So it is in this regard that this article raises certain important questions related to the NYAY scheme. Now the article highlights that in spite of the desirability of the NYAY scheme for poverty alleviation, it will be extremely difficult for the government to implement such scheme, as it will cost around 1.92% of India's GDP. So basically the article raises the concerns that there will be a financial constraint with respect to implementation of the scheme, as it costs around 1.92% of the India's GDP. And it is on this note the author raises the concern that the scheme is economically not feasible unless subsidies which are available to other schemes get completely diverted towards NYAY scheme. Apart from these three concerns, the author has also raised certain concerns which are also associated with universal basic income. These are lack of empirical evidence either in support of UBI or NYAY. The other concern is with respect to withdrawal of labor force from the market, since these people will be getting certain fixed income monthly. Further, this will also lead to abdication of state's responsibility for providing certain basic services. Another problem, as highlighted by the author specifically with respect to NYAY, is with respect to identification of bottom 20% of the population. So, with respect to identification of bottom 20% of the population, the author has suggested to utilize socio-economic caste census of 2011, along with socio-economic caste census, also agricultural census of 2015-16. Further, the author has also said that the government can even take help of database created from schemes like MG Narega, Saubhagya, which is with respect to electrification, and PM Kisan, under which the government provides assured income support to the small and marginalized farmers. And under this PM Kisan scheme, vulnerable land holding farmer families having cultivable land up to 2 hectares will be provided direct income support of rupees 6,000 per year. So the author has stated that in order to identify these bottom 20% of population, the government can use all these data sets with respect to socio-economic caste census of 2011, agricultural census of 2015-16, as well as database created with respect to MG Narega, Saubhagya, as well as PM Kisan. Now, as we have mentioned, that this NYAY scheme has been announced by the Indian National Congress during election campaign, so it's very unlikely that a question based on NYAY scheme will be asked in your prelims examination. However, it becomes important for you to know the difference between NYAY scheme as well as universal basic income. Now, after a discussion, this can be a practice question for mains. It says the idea of providing a fixed basic income to poor households has the merit of poverty alleviation along with certain financial constraints. Discuss. So I hope after going through our discussion, you will be able to attempt this particular question. Thus, this particular article should be read keeping in mind the difference between UBI as well as NYAY scheme. With this, let's move on to our next news analysis. Next news appears in the editorial section on page number 6. It says, a reality check. The move on Azhar in the United Nations Security Council is welcome, but India must continue to engage with China. This editorial highlights the proposal of United States government which intends to bring Masood Azhar listing under the United Nations Security Council sanctions for a public debate at the UNSC. And this step has been taken by the United States after China, which is a permanent member of United Nations Security Council, vetoed the proposal to list Masood Azhar as a global terrorist. The issue is, what if China vetoes this particular proposal of the United States government? Then in such a case, the US is considering a UN General Assembly statement condemning Masood Azhar. So in the backdrop of China vetoing the proposal to ban Masood Azhar as a global terrorist, this editorial highlights the relation between India and China. And it is in this regard the editorial highlights that India must engage with China on the matter of Masood Azhar with patience and persistence. This editorial forms a part of current events of international importance in your prelims examination, and in your mains it gets covered under GS paper 2, specifically under international relations. Now this editorial has also highlighted certain problems with respect to China. It says that China has used its veto power with respect to Azhar Masood listing at the 1267 UNSC Sanctions Committee. And this has been done by China for 4 times in the past decade. So China has been very active in vetoing Masood Azhar as a global terrorist at the United Nations Security Council. The 1267 UNSC Sanctions Committee become very important from your prelims point of view. Now this decision to protect Pakistan is at variance with its tough stand against terror in its Xinjiang province. So considering that China itself takes tough stance against terror in its own provinces, it becomes very hypocritical on part of China to protect Pakistan and terror-based organizations which originate from Pakistan. However, under international pressure, China has agreed for a grey list for Pakistan by Financial Action Task Force for terror financing. Now FATF, that is Financial Action Task Force, provides for 2 kinds of list, that is blacklist as well as grey list. Let us understand these 2 lists as provided by FATF. On blacklist it says when FATF, that is Financial Action Task Force, finds countries to be non-cooperative in global fight against money laundering as well as terror funding, then such countries are placed under blacklist by the Financial Action Task Force. So basically, when a country does not cooperate for fight against money laundering as well as terror funding, then such countries are placed under blacklist. And these countries are placed under economic sanctions, and it becomes very difficult for these countries to raise loans from multilateral institutions like World Bank, IMF, ADB, etc. Further, such countries are also placed under blacklist which are considered as non-cooperative tax havens. And these non-cooperative tax haven countries are also known as non-cooperative countries or territories, that is NCCTs. Now, those countries which are placed under grey list by FATF are such countries which are considered as safe havens for supporting terror funding and money laundering, and such countries are included in the grey list. Further, when a country is put in a grey list, it is sort of a warning to that country that if proper steps are not taken for prohibition of terror funding as well as prohibition of terror related activities from its soil, then such countries will be placed under blacklist. So basically, when a country is placed under grey list, then it has to take appropriate measures to prohibit terror funding as well as take appropriate steps to stop terror related activities or prevent terror related activities originating from its soil. When a country is placed under grey list, it also faces economic sanctions from multilateral institutions like World Bank, IMF, ADB, etc. Further, it becomes very difficult for such countries to raise loans from these multilateral institutions, and also by being put under grey list, it also hampers their trade as well as economy of the nation, because it becomes very difficult for them to take loan from these multilateral institutions and also to carry on trade with other countries. So these are the basic concepts with respect to blacklist and grey list. So it is on this note the editorial mentions that China has agreed for a grey list for Pakistan. So it is in this backdrop that the United States is considering a UN General Assembly statement condemning Masood Azhar if China vetoes this particular proposal of bringing Masood Azhar listing under UNSC sanctions for a public debate at UNSC. So as mentioned, this topic becomes important with respect to current events of international importance. Now this particular question was asked in the year 2018. The question was, International Labour Organization Conventions 138 and 182 are related to. I am mentioning about this question because of its specific convention with respect to convention number 138 and 182 being asked by the UPSC. Hence, this 1267 UNSC Sanctions Committee becomes very important for your upcoming prelims examination. In this particular question asked in the year 2018, the correct answer was child labor. So after this discussion, let's move on to our next news analysis. The next news appears in the editorial section on page number 6. It says, a stop sign. India must raise its ambition on reduction in carbon emissions. Now this topic is based on the report of International Energy Agency, where it points out that India's emissions have grown, but per capita they still remain less as compared to the global average. Now this topic becomes important from your prelims perspective. So in your prelims it gets covered under general issues on environmental ecology as well as climate change, and your mains it gets covered under GS paper 3 under environment. Now this global energy and CO2 status report of International Energy Agency highlights about the emissions trends. It says that driven by higher energy demand in 2018, global energy related CO2 emissions rose by 1.7% to a historic high. It says that while emissions from fossil fuels increased, the power sector accounted for nearly two-thirds of the emission growth. It says that coal use in power alone surpassed 10 gigatons carbon dioxide, and this was mostly in Asia. It further says that China, India, and the United States together accounted for 85% of the net increase in emission, while emissions declined in Germany, Japan, Mexico, France, as well as the United Kingdom. So, in this backdrop, let us understand what this editorial has to say about the Global Energy and CO2 Status Report specifically with respect to India. So, it says that recently the report has stated that India's carbon emissions in 2018 grew by 4.8%. However, as per International Energy Agency, India's emissions have grown, but per capita they remain less than 40% of the global average. So as per the report, despite a 4.8% growth in India's carbon emission, it still remains less than 40% of the global average. Further, the editorial also mentions that India is not historically responsible for these global emissions. So, in this aspect, the developed nations must share their part of historical responsibility of polluting the earth. It specifically says that rich and developed countries are responsible for pumping the majority of greenhouse gas. And on this, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC, also places reliance on principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So historically speaking, India is not that much responsible as compared to the other developed nations. The editorial highlights that to save the world from the impacts of climate change, every country, irrespective of their contribution, or every country, irrespective of their historical contribution for greenhouse gas, must put full efforts to reduce carbon emissions. So, on this note, the editorial has suggested certain measures to combat climate change. Let's go through these suggestions. The first suggestion with respect to India is that India must raise its share in renewable energy. It says that in 2018, the global rise of 7% in renewable energy was mainly due to Europe and China's measure from solar and wind power. So the author says that India must put an extra effort to increase its shares in renewable energy, mainly with respect to solar energy, wind energy, and water energy. The editorial says that India should do so also because of the fact that it is the founder of the International Solar Alliance. The next suggestion suggested in this editorial is that state power utilities should be made responsible for carbon emissions. So it is on this note that the editorial suggests that both the states as well as the central government must promote the solar rooftop photovoltaic because it has a lot of potential in terms of saving energy and also providing clean energy. The editorial mentions that the potential of rooftop solar photovoltaic remains poorly utilized in India despite its falling prices and rising efficiency. The editorial also says that in India, the state power utilities must be made responsible for defined rates of growth with respect to installation of these solar rooftop photovoltaic cells. So, effectively, there is a potential to use this solar energy which currently the central and the state government are not able to utilize. The editorial then highlights about clean coal power plants. In this, the editorial highlights that the priority is with respect to cleaning of such coal power plants which have decades of use ahead. And this process of cleaning these coal power plants must be aided by UNFCCC as it will help in transfer the best technologies for carbon capture, its use and storage, and also for providing financial linkage from the $100 billion annual climate fund as proposed for 2020. The next measure suggested by the editorial is with respect to promotion of green transport in India. It says that India's record in promoting green transport has not been very good as cities are engulfed by pollution, specifically with respect to emission from fossil fuels as well as polluting vehicles. It says that the center should vigorously expand electric mobility through financial incentives for buses, taxis, as well as two-wheelers. It is in this aspect that the FAME scheme of the government must be mentioned. The FAME scheme, that is faster adoption and manufacturing of hybrid and electric vehicles, that is FAME India, was conceptualized in two phases, that is phase 1 and phase 2. Now this report from PIB says that the phase 2 of FAME scheme proposes to give push to electric vehicles in India in the public transport and also seeks to encourage adoption of electric vehicles by way of market creation and demand aggregation. It says that the draft scheme has envisaged holistic growth of the electric vehicle industry, including providing for charging infrastructure, research and development of electric vehicle technologies, and also push towards greater indigenization. In order to promote green transport in India, the Government of India must vigorously support and encourage the adoption of phase 2 of FAME scheme. The editorial then mentions about green measures. It says that India should adopt measures like updating building codes which promote more efficient utilization of energy, and it also helps in raising energy efficiencies. So these are some of the suggestions as highlighted in this editorial with respect to curbing carbon emissions in India. So this editorial has suggested that all these suggestions will help in meeting the national pledge undertaken under the Paris Agreement to cut energy intensity of GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030 as compared to the 2005 levels. Now this topic becomes extremely important as questions have been asked previously by UPSC. Let's go through some of the questions. Now, both these questions were asked in the year 2016. The question was, with reference to agreement at UNFCCC meeting in Paris in 2015, which of the following statements are correct? First, an agreement was signed by all the member countries of United Nations and it will go into effect in 2017. No, the statement was incorrect. Second, agreement aims to limit the greenhouse gas emissions so that rise in average global temperature by the end of this century does not exceed 2 degrees Celsius or even 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Yes, this statement was correct. Third, developed countries acknowledge their historical responsibility in global warming and committed to donate $1,000 billion a year from 2020 to help developing countries to cope with climate change. No, the statement again was incorrect, as the amount agreed upon was $100 billion and not $1,000 billion. So in this, B is the correct answer, that is 2 only. Now another question asked was with respect to this term intended nationally determined contributions. It says this term is sometimes seen in the news in the context of. Options were given in this as well. B was the correct answer, that is plan of action outlined by the countries of the world to combat climate change. So we understand that the concept of climate change is very important as questions have been asked previously by the UPSC. So on this note, this report of International Energy Agency on global energy and CO2 status report becomes extremely crucial for our prelims. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. The next news appears on page number 18. It says 5 varieties of Indian coffee awarded GI certification, that is geographic indication. Now this topic gets covered under Science and Technology or under General Science in your prelims examination. Now as per the news, the GI tag has been issued for 5 kinds of coffee, namely the Coorg Arabica coffee, Wayanad Robusta coffee, Chikmagalur Arabica coffee, Araku Valley Arabica coffee and Baba Budangiri's Arabica coffee. So these are the 5 varieties of coffee which have been provided the GI tag by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So each variety of these coffees have certain speciality. It says that the Coorg Arabica coffee is grown specifically in the Kodagu district in Karnataka, whereas the Wayanad Robusta coffee is mainly grown in Wayanad district of Kerala. Further, it says that the Chikmagalur Arabica coffee and Baba Budangiri's Arabica coffee are both grown in Chikmagalur district in Karnataka. It further says that Araku Valley Arabica coffee is grown in Vishakhapatnam district in Andhra Pradesh and Koraput district in Orissa. So all these aspects again with respect to states becomes important with respect to variety of coffees. Now the news also mentions about Monsoon Malabar Robusta coffee and says that it was earlier given the GI certificate. Another important aspect with respect to coffee growing in India is that in India, coffee is grown under shade, hand-picked and then it is sun-dried. Now with respect to promotion of coffee, the Ministry of Commerce and Industry has also launched an online market for these coffee. This online market will help in integrating farmers with the market in a transparent manner, and this will also help in getting fair price for these coffee growers. So this online coffee market will help in not only the promotion of coffee market in India but also help in its export. So after understanding the different varieties of coffee which have been provided GI tag, let us learn certain basic facts about the GI tag, that is geographical indication tag. A GI is primarily an agriculture, natural or manufactured product. It can also include handicrafts and industrial goods originating from a definite geographical territory. So the important aspect with respect to a GI tag is its definitiveness with respect to a geographical territory. Further, it mentions that GI tag conveys an assurance of quality and distinctiveness through which we can actually locate its origin in that defined geographical area or in a defined geographical locality. Further, it says that GI tag is covered under WTO's agreement on trade related aspects of intellectual property rights, that is TRIPS. This aspect becomes extremely important to remember from your prelims point of view. And India has enacted the Geographical Indication of Goods Registration and Protection Act 1999 to promote and protect GI tags in India. Now, after understanding certain basic facts about GI, let's also go through some of the benefits which this GI tag provides. Now, a GI tag enables those who have a right to use the indication to prevent its use by a third party. Further, it gives legal protection to Indian geographical indications, which in turn helps in boosting export of that particular thing to which a GI tag has been provided. By having a GI tag also promotes economic prosperity of producers of such goods produced in a definitive geographical territory. Further, it helps in increasing the application for registration of geographical indication. It then says that any association of persons, producers, organization or authority established by or under the law can apply for registration of a GI tag, and the applicant must represent the interest of the producers. So these can be said to be some of the benefits with respect to GI tag. Another important aspect with respect to GI tag is that the registration of a geographical indication is valid for a period of 10 years. However, this period of 10 years can be renewed from time to time for a further period of 10 years each. Now, another question which comes into mind with respect to GI tag is that how is a GI tag different from a trademark? Now, trademark is a mark which is used in terms of trading or in the course of a business, and it helps in distinguishing goods or services provided by that particular institution or by that particular company. So it says that a trademark is a sign which is used in the course of trade, and it distinguishes goods or services of one enterprise from those of other enterprises. Whereas a geographical indication is an indication used to identify goods having special characteristics originating from a definitive geographical territory. So this is the basic difference between a GI tag and a trademark. Hence, this particular news with respect to GI tag becomes very important from your prelims point of view. Now, after our discussion, these forms your practice question for the day. What you can do is to take a pause of 5 seconds. First, it says, consider the following statements about low Earth orbit. First, it refers to an Earth-centered orbit with an altitude of 3000 km or more. No, this statement is incorrect, as the low Earth orbit refers to an Earth-centered orbit with an altitude of 2000 km or less. Second, most of the satellites, including International Space Station, operates in low Earth orbit. Yes, this statement is correct. So in this, the correct answer is B, that is 2 only. The second question says, which of the following can be said to be the objectives of Financial Action Task Force? Options are, first, set regulatory and operational standards to combat money laundering. Yes, the statement is correct. Second, prevent terrorist funding. Yes, the statement is also correct. So in this, the correct answer is C, that is both 1 and 2. Now these are your next practice question for the day. What you can do is to take a pause of 5 seconds. It says, which of the following can be said to be greenhouse gases? Options are CO2, CH4, nitrous oxide, ozone, water vapor. In this, all these are greenhouse gases. Hence, in this, the correct answer is D, that is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. The next question says, consider the following statements. First, India does not have a specific legislation on geographical indication. No, this statement is incorrect, as India has a specific legislation on geographical indication. Second, GI, that is geographical indication, is covered under WTO's agreement on TRIPS. Yes, this statement is correct. So in this, the correct answer is B, that is 2 only. So with this, let's move on to the question for the day.